Hi, this is Femi Taylor. I play Ula in Return of the Jedi, Jabba the Hutt's slave dancer. You're listening to the Rebel Base Card Podcast.
If they don't go for this, we're gonna have to get out of here pretty quick, Chewie.
Everything's gonna be all right, kid.
You found the Rebel Base Card Podcast.
She may not look like much, but she's got it where it counts, kid.
I'm your host, Greg McLaughlin.
Have I made a few bad decisions? Sure.
We talk about cards, collecting Star Wars, and to people in the Star Wars community.
Don't worry, we're gonna meet up with some friends of mine.
Look for special episodes called The Breakfast Pack, talking about your favorite Star Wars shows.
We will never have a better chance than this.
All right, let's get started.
Well, perhaps it is time to begin again.
Welcome back, or if this is your first episode, welcome aboard. My name is Greg McLaughlin, and this is the Rebel Base Card Podcast. Awesome show for you tonight, as my guest is Brian Hickey. He is a multidisciplinary visual artist and International Design Award winner. He has worked in the publishing industry for many years and has self-published 5 books on collectible toys with Patty Lennon, fulfilling the roles of art director, photographer, and graphic designer for all. Brian has also worked with acclaimed toy designers Boss Flight Studio, designing the packaging for a number of their licensed products, including Bucky O'Hare and Sam & Max. Brian's latest Kickstarter book, Total Star Wars Toys, The Palitoy Saga, takes an in-depth look at Palitoy's role in the Star Wars toys phenomenon between the years of 1977 and 1985. As stated in the campaign, it's the definitive history of Palitoy's pivotal role in the Star Wars phenomenon. It's a must-have for collectors and fans alike, as well as being a book about toys. It's also the story of the creative minds, the marketing geniuses, and the manufacturing experts who shaped the Star Wars universe for a generation. Total Star Wars Toys delves deep into the Palitoy story, revealing the challenges, triumphs, and behind-the-scenes details that make these toys so iconic. So there's interviews with key figures at Palitoy, such as Bob Brechin, Roger Morrison, and many more, including Jim Swearingen from Kenner. You're going to hear a lot of untold stories, see a lot of pictures, and get some of Brian's own amazing toy photography. It's the story from initial concepts to marketing campaigns to variant toys that we didn't see here in the U.S. This Kickstarter campaign is going to put together a huge tome that includes interviews, breakdowns, cardback variations, behind-the-scenes photos, and glorious dioramas of vintage goodness. So, I was able to get through an introduction. Thank you very much, Mark Newbold. This interview with Brian Hickey, who was so awesome, came on, and we just had a ball talking about this Kickstarter. I had already gotten in, and I wanted to learn more. As we've been talking on the program, I've been diving deep into the Star Wars Weekly, the UK Marvel comic releases, finding stories that weren't printed here in the US. And I think as any collector, the longer you go, you start looking to see what were the experiences of folks elsewhere. Were they the same? Did they have the same kind of toys? What kind of impact did Star Wars have in places other than in my own living room underneath the Christmas tree? So I hope you're going to enjoy this interview right after this.
Hi, this is Mark Newbold from Fantha Tracks, and you're listening to the Rebel Base Card Podcast. Great pull, kid.
We're in attack position now, sir.
Hold here.
We're not going to attack.
I have my orders from the Emperor himself. He has something special planned for me. We only need to keep him from escaping.
Brian, the first thing I wanted to say is, congratulations on the one hand. As we are in your campaign, the Kickstarter campaign, you're funded, but maybe, it's now there's a sense of we've gone past the if and now we get into the when. As someone who's done Kickstarters before, where's your head at in the middle of a campaign like this?
At this point in the campaign, really our focus right now is we know the book is going to happen thanks to the amazing support that we've had from our backers to fund in about 48 hours, maybe less than that even, was really, really fantastic support from the community. So on the one hand, you've got that great sort of peace of mind. We know we've got a great product, a great project as well, and that is going to come out later this year. But right now we're focusing on our stretch goals because we want to make this as good as we can possibly make it. And obviously the first stretch goal unlocked hours after we funded, and that added more content to the book, focusing on the impact that Star Wars had on the British comic scene. I'm very excited about that piece that my friend and colleague David MacDonald is kind of, is working on that right now. And our next stretch goal is to unlock or to upgrade the book from a soft cover to a hardback, a coffee table hardback edition. And we've got other stretch goals beyond that, enhancing the overall finish of the book, taking it up to a deluxe level. And we have as well a bespoke designed telescoping slipcase that will elevate the whole product to a really, really super edition for collectors. So that's what we're focused on that right now. And I'm very lucky that I get the chance to talk to people like you, Greg, and talk Star Wars and talk Palitoy, and two of my passions. So it's great.
And it seems like when you have done a number of Kickstarters as you have, there's probably a sense of ease, especially for a project like this that may be bigger than, it's obviously Star Wars toys are worldwide, but we are focusing in this campaign on the Palitoy story. But I think it has to give you a sense of like, all right, a lot of what I figured out before, maybe some of the things that we could have done a little different, or some design choices, or all this maybe goes into how you maybe got this book project started and what your goals were for.
Really, this project kind of was born out of a previous project that I was very fortunate to be involved in. Bob Brechin, who is the former chief designer at Palitoy, and he would have worked on the Star Wars brand and many other brands, both in boys and girls toys at the time. Bob got in touch with me back in, let's say, 2022, and asked me if I would help him design and publish his book titled My Palitoy Story. And that was a fascinating project. It dived really deep into the history of Palitoy, and then how kind of social history influenced both the evolution of the company and the toy industry as well. And it covered all the big brands that Palitoy worked on, including Star Wars. And as part of that project, we uncovered loads of great material, both from Bob's personal collection of photos and slides, but also from the collection of his late friend, Brian Turner, another designer at Palitoy. So there was too much information to go into Bob's book, and we were talking hundreds and hundreds of slides, 35 mil slides. We just couldn't get them into Bob's book. So Bob left them with me after his book was published, and those particular Kickstarter awards were fulfilled. I had those photos for a few months, and I began scanning all of that material. And what I found as I was working through it was there was amazing behind the scenes shots of Star Wars related content, Palitoy Star Wars related content. And that included things like when Bob and Roger visited Cincinnati in November 1977 to meet with Kenner, with a view to Palitoy kind of getting briefed on what they needed to do to bring Star Wars product to market. They took loads of photos on that trip, some of it in the model shop at Kenner. They also visited the Fun Dimensions factory where the die-cast vehicles were being made. They took loads of shots in there. But other photos include things like Toy Fair displays. So we have the Star Wars Toy Fair display from January 1978. So the first time that Star Wars toys would have been shown maybe publicly. There would have been kind of private showings to retailers, both at Kenner and at Palitoy prior to that. But this was the first major kind of public display of the classic Star Wars toys. And we've got the subsequent 79, 80, 81 Toy Fairs, and beyond that. So there's lots of great material there, and it's not just showing the displays itself, but also the staff kind of doing some of the setup, unloading costumes that they got direct from Lucasfilm, the Boba Fett costume being carried out on a mannequin at the back of a truck and carried into Toy Fair. So great photos like that. And also some other, what we recently uncovered was, and we shared this in our last update, with the blueprints. Not blueprints isn't even the right term, because these are hand drawn, not actual prints, but they're beautifully drafted up drawings for making the tooling, Palitoy's tooling for the twin pod cloud car vehicle.
Wow.
And that really, like, they are a one of a kind item, really special. And we also got to see a test shot of the cardboard Death Star. So this would have been printed, they ran a few off the press initially, and then Palitoy's kind of manufacturing team would have reviewed it for quality, marked up some changes that needed to be made, making sure the slots were wide enough or aligned correctly, before modifying the artwork and then getting the full job run. So we got to see one of those prototypes and photograph that with the hand markings, marked up on it. Again, I don't want to say it's a one of a kind item, because there would have been a few prototypes produced, but we don't know if any of them, other than the one we saw, still exists today. Wow. So that was an amazing thing to uncover as well. So it's all that really great, exciting stuff that I think is a really important part of the Palitoy story within Star Wars. We want to get that across in the book. And of course, we're documenting the toys that were released as well. So there'll be lots of photos of the toys. And then even within that as well, we've reached out to other collectors. We've got access to private collections. So we're incorporating things like, display pieces that were produced for toy stores back in the 1980s that have survived to this day. They've made their way into private collections, and they've been photographed. They'll be included in the book as well, amongst other kind of, we'll say one-off collectible items that have some sort of association back to Palitoy. So it's not just, generic movie merchandise. It is everything that we have is specific to Palitoy, its marketing and distribution of the toys.
Wow. And it's also interesting because at the time, now I think it's, if a movie or a franchise comes out and they're doing licensee stuff, now there's a lot more formal process. But one thing that's kind of interesting, keying off what you're saying, is the relationship not only between Lucasfilm and Kenner, but Lucasfilm, Kenner, and Palitoy. It has to have been unprecedented, the level that everyone's working together, and probably they're trying to make it up as they go along, as it were. I mean, there may have been lines that might have been similar, but this has to be new ground. And for audiences in the US and the UK, it's just wild how they were working together and also could come up with their own unique take.
There was certainly a lot of kind of internal politics within the General Mills toy group, of which Kenner and Palitoy were both part of that. Another, Clipper, Miro Meccano, like they all would have been part of that group as well. So there is a lot of kind of politics there. And we do talk to, we have interviewed Jeff Maisy, who was the brand manager for Star Wars. And he would go on to become the brand manager for not just Britain, but for all of Europe. So he shares a lot of great insights, about his experience within those kind of internal, I suppose, struggles, for want of a better term, within the General Mills toy group itself. But when it came down to communicating with Lucasfilm, Palitoy had a direct line of communication to Lucasfilm. So they previously, at the very beginning, they had to go via Lucasfilm's office in the United States. But because the process took so long to get proofs over there, have them signed off, and maybe not signed off, maybe changes marked up and then sent back over to America to be reviewed and approved. It was too time consuming. So Lucasfilm then set up an office in London, which helped kind of expedite that process of kind of reviewing and approval. So, for example, for people who are interested in collecting, say, the Palitoy cardback variations, the legal lines were kind of sometimes those variations are just down to the legal blurb on the end of the card, and that comes from this process of kind of back and forth, and the legal lines would be updating all the time. So with the space of a year, you could have multiple updates to the legal lines, and ultimately that would mean changes to the card back variations. So yeah, there was certain communication hurdles that had to be overcome, and again, Jeff Maisy shares a lot of insights as to how Palitoy kind of managed a lot of that.
It also has to be amazing because we know in the U.S., Kenner didn't have the toys ready for Christmas. Famously, you get a lot of these introduced in '78, and I have to think there has to have been some pressure on all companies involved because they don't know how long, what the legs of this franchise could be. It's a movie at this point. It's not a franchise, yet per se, but the goal has to be, it's like we have to ramp up production, get these toys out, and get the kids excited about them, and also not be a year or two later, right? We're not talking not like a HasLab where it's like, hey, here's a great idea, and 2 years later you'll get it. These kids are wanting this stuff now. They're getting excited. I think maybe in the UK where the film debuts a little later, it gives maybe Palitoy a little more time, but at what point they have to be scrambling. Like I said, having Lucasfilm there helps, but still, it's like we got to get these toys into market. It's got to be they got to feel like they're on the clock.
Well, I think because the film was released later in the UK, it kind of made it a tougher sell for Palitoy. Kenner, they did the empty box idea, which was proved to work very successfully for them, but that was rejected by British retailers. Palitoy couldn't sell that. They wanted to take that over. They did their best to pitch it to retailers. It was shot down. And the fact that the movie was coming out, at Christmas time, and Christmas is obviously when retailers expect to sell their toys, with no Star Wars product available to kind of line up with that hype of the movie, retailers were thinking in Britain, well, by the time the movie's out of theaters and maybe in a few weeks or a few months, the hype is going to die down and we'll have lost all the momentum. Nobody's going to want Star Wars toys. So we don't want them. And Palitoy had to kind of to work through that. They had to basically sell their popular lines like Action Man. That's for American listeners who aren't familiar, Action Man is essentially your 12-inch G.I. Joe. That was their biggest seller at the time. It was huge, in fact, and they didn't even think they needed Star Wars because they were having such great success with Action Man. They would discount the Action Man product to retailers if they would put in an order for Star Wars as well. So they were trying to incentivize that way. And of course, as collectors will know, there's some differences between the early Palitoy play sets and vehicles compared to their Kenner counterparts. So things like the X-Wing, Palitoy's X-Wing had all the electrics stripped out of it. Even the tooling was simplified as well, just to make it easier and quicker to produce. The Jawa, Land of the Jawas playset, the Cantina playset, and the Droid Factory were all simplified from their Kenner counterparts. All to keep costs down, because Palitoy saw Star Wars as being a very risky property, and they didn't want to lose a lot of money on it. So they put a lot of effort into manage their costs as best they could. So the cardboard Death Star, for example, Palitoy didn't want to spend a lot of money making Kenner's plastic Death Star because that would just be too expensive. So it was way cheaper to make a cardboard alternative. So that's all showing the kind of the mindset at the time before the toys were on the actual shelves. There was a lot of fear, and it was certainly considered high risk by Palitoy, this particular property. But once it kind of hit the market and just exploded and became a huge hit, all those fears just dissolved, and we ended up getting the great toys that we got. So.
to put it on yourself to explain the impact of what these toys. I can see some of the impact on the shelves behind you, and mine's very well hidden. Otherwise, my wife gets a little upset about it. But for me, I can say that once I saw the movie and I got some of the toys, I wanted nothing else. It was all Star Wars all the time, cards, comics, what have you. But to a kid over there, it has to, same thing. It's just, it has to just be this. This is something, this is just something completely different. And what the imagination it must spur and all this. How did it feel?
Well, I was a Star Wars. The moment I saw the Star Wars in cinemas, and I'm going to guess it was probably early '78 when I went to see that. I was a fan. I was blown away. I absolutely loved it. In terms of kind of the merch that came out after that, the trading cards, and the weekly comics, the Marvel UK weekly comics. I vividly remember those, picking those up. Marvel UK distribution wasn't great in Ireland, so I never had a kind of a continuous run of comics. It would just be whatever I could grab here and there. But I love that material. I did not even know there were toys though until it was probably maybe 79, maybe even 1980.
Wow.
Before a kid at school, we'd moved house, and I was in a brand new school, and this kid had brought in the Imperial Troop Transporter with a squad of stormtroopers. I immediately recognized that this is Star Wars, but never knew. It was only at that moment I realized there's actual Star Wars toys available. And so I pretty much had my Christmas list and my birthday list ready to go by the time I left school that day.
Oh my goodness. And something else, coming from a rural area, and especially yourself in Ireland, where, things still have to make their way to, your country. It's also has to be this smattering of, just like with the UK weeklies. With us, we had a one stoplight town, and we had a little pharmacy and newsstand. And you're right, if maybe it got to you that month, maybe it didn't. But
yeah,
I'm sure the kids were also. I think maybe the kids like today all of a sudden were very aware of what stores were carrying it. And maybe when they got their replenishment, I wonder if you have these kids that are just kind of making their parents wait. I think this department has it. There has to be this run that even these retailers have no idea what they just got into.
Well, I certainly have friends here in Ireland who kind of, like me, they grew up outside of the kind of the city areas, and they talk about when their family would do a trip up to the city, they would make sure that they hit there was certain toy stores, or if not dedicated toy stores, big department stores with a toy department, that they would hit those up and always bring back a haul of maybe Star Wars, or it could be Action Force was another big line for us that Palitoy also produced. So they were kind of our favorites, as kids growing up. So but yeah, where I grew up, there wasn't much in terms of kind of retail. There weren't any dedicated toy shops, and you might get occasionally a few carded figures in a little section, and they'd be gone like that. Once they got them in, they were gone like within a day.
Oh my goodness! Now, if we've fast forward a bit, you are a designer. You have, what I kind of love is, our journeys kind of take us from rediscovering the movies, right? Over the years, we've had the prequels and the Clone Wars and all the Disney Plus, and maybe we've either rediscovered our collections, we've reinvested in them, replaced them, as it were, and got into new things. But, what I love also in listening to a lot of great interviews with you is, and seeing a lot of your photography, is this where you want to start kind of telling the story that's been in your head for decades, where you have these figures and, you put together the movies, scenes where you're making these scenes. And I also just love reaching out and trying to go, I'm trying to recreate this scene of the Emperor's Landing, and I have to borrow these collections. But, but you have to just love these creative, challenges to kind of up the photography. Like, I could look at a picture of my beater stormtrooper all day, every day. I have a little trash compactor piece at my office where I have, pencils in. It's protected, but it's still, I can look at it every day. But I mean, like, going from that, I want to, I'm playing with my toys, but I'm taking pictures of it, but now I want to up it to the next level. That had to just really fire a lot of things in your brain as far as like, this is fun. Now it's something more.
I mean, I love that you brought that up. So I suppose that I'd probably be best known within the Star Wars community for my Star Wars photography. And for people who aren't familiar, I've recreated the original trilogy movies with the vintage toys. And I've shared those on my Instagram, but they're also, you go to totaltoybooks.com, there's a link there. You can read it as a book for free. And that started probably, I got back into collecting in the 2000s. I'd lost all my childhood toys. We'd moved house, my parents dumped all my stuff. So when I got back into collecting, I love to display my stuff, and I love to play with my toys. So and play for me is getting them out and setting them up in scenes and taking photographs. So toy photography is my way of playing with my toys. And I collect G.I. Joes, I collect Action Force, and it kind of started there, working with those figures, the more modern articulated figures. But back around 2017, maybe even before then, I had this idea, wouldn't it be great to recreate the whole original trilogy with just the vintage figures, the 5 POA figures. It would be a creative challenge because they're not as articulated as modern figures, but it would be a really fun project to do, but also a very ambitious project because my collection is pretty modest compared to some collectors. But that seed of an idea just wouldn't go away. And I took my first sort of action on that back in 2017, where I got in contact with a good friend of mine over in the UK, a guy called Dave Tree. And you mentioned Farthest From earlier in our chat, and Dave is he's the organizer of that particular convention. And I reached out, I discussed the idea with Dave, and he totally got us, thought it was a great idea. And I just from there embarked off in this journey of trying to, see how I could do this. And I began taking shots with my own collection first, and then that started to expand. But when I kind of went as far as I could go with my own collection, I knew I needed to reach out to find other collectors who could possibly help me out. And I need to give, at this point, I've got to give a big shout out to my friend Ken Costello. I met Ken online in a Star Wars kind of buy, sell, and trade group, and I bought some pieces off him. He showed me his collection, and he had like a lot of stuff that I didn't have. So I broached the idea to Ken, and he very graciously allowed me to borrow some of his pieces to use to photograph for the book. But not only that, he reached out to other collectors that he knew in Ireland. So we take that particular example there of the Emperor's arrival on the Death Star. That needed a lot of figures to pull that scene together. So there's 5 separate collections came together to make that happen. And Ken was the guy who reached out to everybody and made it possible. So he's a good friend, and I always love to give Ken a shout out whenever I get to talk about that photo, because he's so important in making it happen.
Oh my gosh. And the thing when I was watching the photo, I was going, I think there are more figures there than Lucas had extras, because most of that scene was a matte painting. So it has to give you some level of satisfaction going, hey, I'm more accurate in the, in showing perspective and bodies. Oh, no, I'm just kidding. But, I also wonder, as you're going through this, and as you said, you had a modest collection, were there things that you go, you know what, I didn't, yes, I had to replace a lot of my collection, but are there pieces that you go, you know what, I would like to have that now? I didn't get that as a kid. It wasn't available, or there's a variant I don't have. Did it affect kind of how you were collecting, for research, right? Or just for your personal
Oh God, yeah. I mean, and like I'm sure this is something that all collectors, have in common. You start off, you have something very specific in mind, which could be, I just want the figures that I had as a kid. In my case, I was like, I'm never going to collect vehicles. I don't have space. I just want figures. But that didn't last long.
Yeah, I'm not sure what's hanging from your roof, but that doesn't the ceiling that doesn't look
there.
like I don't have any room for vehicles. I'm kidding.
So yeah, and making it specific to Star Wars, there's lots of stuff there that I never had as a kid that I really wanted to get. So, I mean, a good example, a really simple one, is the Cap 2 mini rig. I never had one of those as a kid, but I had those kids on my street. One kid on my street had one, and I always thought it was a really, really cool little vehicle. So I think I've got 3 Cap 2s over there. I love that mini rig. And on the bigger vehicles, well, I mean, I never had an Imperial shuttle. I still don't have one, but that is one that I would love to get. And I did see, I was very lucky to see in person a Power of the Force skiff.
Ooh.
Again, from a collection of a friend of mine here in Ireland, a guy called John J. Lennon. He let me borrow that for one of my shots. And that's a really nice vehicle. So that's something, if I ever had the budget, I'd love to get that and include that in my collection too.
Oh my goodness. It's interesting also thinking of the fortunes of both, Kenner and Palitoy, and the employees and all the people that their hard work went into this. In your discussions with them, did they ever really think that they were also going to be quote unquote rock stars amongst, large swaths of the community, in that people just can't get enough of hearing how the sausage was made?
They none of them expected that was going to happen. Like when they were working on these brands back in the 1970s and 80s, they had no idea that there was going to be a great resurgence in kind of interest in them, and that they were going to be, making convention appearances, being interviewed, featured in books, podcasts, etc. Back then, it was just a job, and Star Wars was one brand of many that the Palitoy team were working on. And Palitoy's design team were all made redundant in 1984. They were all let go, with changes within the General Mills toy group had a massive effect on Palitoy. And all they were thinking right then was, how are they going to survive? How are they going to pay the bills? Mm-hmm. They weren't thinking that they were making history. That didn't even occur to them that they were doing that. So it's wonderful for me today to be able to travel over to England to meet some of those wonderful people from Palitoy and interview them. And what comes across is that while they didn't realize that they were making history, they certainly did love what they did. They were passionate about their work. They wanted to do good work. They believed that they knew they were making toys for children to enjoy, and they just wanted to do the best that they could. And so that passion is still there. They're still very passionate about it, and that's what I hope comes across in this book, is how they didn't expect anything other than just to do a great job when they were working on it, and they had no consideration for future rewards in terms of kind of fan worship or anything like that. They just wanted to do a good job and take satisfaction.
Yeah, and it's not every day where someone wants to make a book of what your job is. And I have to think that maybe some of the reactions, maybe some of the initial thoughts, or when they see, especially some of the previous, volumes, I wonder, those conversations with you have to be fascinating, because it is one thing to also say, hey, I have an idea for this, but you have tangible results and you also have this going on. I just wonder for those, I'm just going to I think when they, even to maybe some of them, maybe they didn't realize the full scope, or they didn't see all the pictures and all the stuff. They were just, I maybe was working on my one thing, and maybe I saw some of the other stuff, but now they probably have to go, this is a lot bigger than I even maybe thought.
Oh, for sure, absolutely. We take even like that X-wing there, for example. Like I was interviewing Greg Hughes, the designer who modified the X-wing design, for Palitoy to produce it, and it was just he was working on a lot of different stuff at Palitoy at the time, and this was one job. His boss said, "Look, we just need to get this done, get it done quick, and then you're moving on to the next thing." So it's he didn't have time to kind of to think about it or ponder any kind of future ramifications. It was just, this has got to be done well, and it's got to be done quick. And now I've got another task I need to move on to for this other brand over here. Let's just keep going,
And you have to wonder, it's like, were some of them even that, were they big Star Wars fans at all, or now they just have to go? I think maybe it kind of hit later on where it starts to kind of, sink in what they're doing, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is great. And maybe now they even have an appreciation for some of the newer content that came out to go, yeah, as a part of that. You see that? I remember working on that.
Well, I know that Bob Brechin, prior to Star Wars, he was a big sci-fi fan. He loved science fiction. And you can see that come across in some of Bob's concept work for other, say, for the Action Force brand. Action Force is the same scale as the Star Wars figures, and it's another brand that Palitoy produced. So that kind of fantasy sci-fi element, Bob was a big fan of that. And when he saw Star Wars, he went to see it. I think it's opening weekend. Might have even been like the opening day in Britain. He got to see it, and he was a fan straight away. He absolutely loved it. I was lucky enough to get to interview Jim Swearingen for this book as well. And Jim's also, a big sci-fi fan, though he was a big George Lucas fan. He was familiar with George Lucas's work on THX 1138. So he knew George's work prior to seeing Star Wars. So there's some parallels between Jim and Bob, in that they were both both sci-fi fans, and so for them Star Wars wasn't a hard sell. They were on board straight away. It was more from it's more the marketing department in Palitoy. They were the ones who were like, this looks just too risky. We're not sure if we want to take this on. But thankfully, they were all proved wrong, and it ended up being a huge hit.
Hey, what kind of agreements or things, when you're publishing a book of this kind of size and scope, what are some of the things that you have to kind of make sure either you have your ducks in a row, or you have the blessings of this or that, or the legalese? What are some of the things you have to kind of line up to make sure this just turns out the way and turns out, put it that way?
Well, there's a whole lot of different levels there. So if we look, say, at the imagery included in the book, so we have, that's coming from multiple sources. So we have, the personal collections of Bob Brechin and Brian Turner, which we've been given permission to use in the book. So that's number one. But supporting that story, we're also reaching out to the British media, both the press and also the television media in the UK, to source imagery there that is, again, Palitoy / Star Wars specific. And all of that has to be licensed and paid for. So I've contacted, I would say, maybe about 10 different media sources. And prior to contacting them, I would have kind of had my short list of images, and so I have to ask them if they will, allow me to license those images for the book, and then put the proper license agreement in place. So that's obviously critical to have that lined up before this book goes to print. The other type of imagery then is imagery that I generate. So if they're my own images, there isn't really a copyright issue there, but I do need to get permission from collectors to work with them to photograph parts of their collection, to include that in the book as well. So those permissions have to be organized prior to me traveling to the UK to take any photos, or within Ireland either. So that is something that's common with all of the book projects that I've worked on, is that if where a license agreement needs to be in place, that is in place. Where permission has to be sought and granted, that's in place as well prior to going into production.
And then, we're a couple weeks away from the campaign to be finished. Once it gets done, now how is the set schedule or the things that have to kind of fall in place then before it goes out to the folks who back it on Kickstarter?
So in terms of our kind of production schedule, right now we're in what we call kind of like a gathering stage. So the gathering stage is where we pull together all of our research, all of our image assets, and everything that we need to be able to produce the book. And that process began like last year. So we're coming into the final stages of that. So I would imagine shortly after the campaign ends, we'll be in a position where we can say, okay, we've got this is all the interviews we have, this is all the photography that we have, this is the text we have written so far, and here's what we're working on. And we'll look to see if there's any gaps in our information. And if we need to, conduct any kind of further research or interviews to fill those gaps, we'll make sure that's done first. Then the writing has to be finalized. Any photography that's needed to be done has to be finalized as well. And then we move into the design stage from there. And then once it's designed and approved, within, myself, Paddy and David, and we do have some really good friends who are Palitoy experts that we will be bringing them in to get an objective opinion as well, to make sure that we haven't, that what we've put together is rock solid.
Right.
And the Palitoy people will also, Bob and his colleagues, they will also be reviewing the book before it goes to print. So we'll be incorporating any feedback from that kind of circle of, we'll say, experts in the field, and then we'll go to print once we're happy that everything is, as I say, fairly robust and rock solid. So with that kind of general sort of process, we're expecting to have books in hand ready to ship by Q4 of this year, and we'll start shipping our rewards out to backers. And obviously, as we work, from now through to that point, we'll be putting out regular updates. So for people who aren't familiar with how Kickstarter works, once you make a pledge and become a backer on the project, every time we post an update on our Kickstarter page, it gets emailed out to you automatically. And then also via our own mailing list on totaltoybooks.com, we'll be putting the updates out there as well. So there'll be a lot of communication with our backers, with our supporters, of how we're doing in terms of our schedule. But we've produced multiple books in the past. So this is, I think, this is maybe our 10th book that we're doing. So we've got a pretty good handle on how long it takes to put a book together. So we can we can confidently say, yes, Q4 this year, we're going to have books ready to ship to backers. So that means people will have their books in plenty of time before Christmas, and hopefully a lot sooner than that, all going well.
Excellent. And then these projects, these books, they have literally they have a shelf life afterwards. What happens post-release, other than, a couple extra pints down at the pub once we get that last one in the mail? But I'm certain that you'll be called upon for panels. You'll be still going to cons and things like that in 2026 for it, and even ones this year for it. What happens? What is that like once you get one of these projects done, or this particular project done?
Well, we're already talking about other projects. Myself and Paddy have a lot of ideas for other stuff we want to do, not Star Wars related, but certainly vintage toy focused. And I even had a conversation with Bob Brechin last weekend in Leicester about ideas that Bob was throwing at me for future books. So there's no shortage of kind of vintage material that we can, bring to light in a book format with, beautiful photography, a really great narrative, to share with collectors. Obviously, our focus right now is this book. This is what is first and foremost on the radar. So we want to get this, book completed. We want to get it out to backers. We have a couple of other projects that are also going to be going to press later this year as well. Namely the Total Roboskull book, which we started on back in, a couple of years ago. So that is in the final stages. That's and that's going to be, we're really excited about that book because there's a big Palitoy slant to that as well. Because the original Roboskull was designed by Bob Brechin at Palitoy.
Wow.
So we're very excited to share that as well with people. But in terms of brand new projects, we're not ready to announce anything just yet, but we have lots of ideas.
And, for Star Wars fans, for toy fans, and folks that just want a nice, gorgeous compilation, and I think that's what I kind of appreciate more, and one of the reasons why I was in it's like, not only is this a lot of history, but it's going to be, it looks beautiful, and just from everything that you've done so far, it's just going to be an amazing keepsake and research, tome that you'll be referring to time and time again. I want to get people, in on this and get another stretch goal. I mean, I have to say, but I was kind of curious, where can people get in on the campaign?
Well, the best place to, if you go to Kickstarter and search for Total Star Wars Toys, the Palitoy Saga, that'll bring you to the Kickstarter page. And in fact, you could just search for that title on Google. That will bring you straight into the Kickstarter. You can also go to totaltoybooks.com, and there's a link from there on it, and within our website brings you to Kickstarter, and you can sign up to our mailing list, because as we work towards the end of the campaign, we'll be sending out multiple updates to anyone on our mailing list, letting them know where we're at in terms of our stretch goals, how long is left on the campaign. So that really is probably, go to totaltoybooks.com and sign up to the mailing list, and you'll definitely get notified in plenty of time before the campaign ends. But if you just search Total Star Wars Toys, the Palitoy Saga, you'll find the Kickstarter page on Google. It'll come up top of the listings. It'll take you right in there.
Awesome. And if they want to follow you online and see some of the great photography you've done and see some of those updates on the socials, where can they find you, Brian?
So on Instagram, you can find my personal account, Instagram/Brian the Hick. That'll get you straight in there. You can scroll down, you can see all of my Star Wars photography in there. Also on Facebook, it's look for Total Toy Books on Facebook, and our Facebook page is in there. And that, within our feed, you'll find links off to our various kind of Star Wars photography, the Kickstarter, and other projects that we've worked on.
I'm so excited. I'm happy for you. I'm happy for me. What am I saying? I can't wait to see this, and it's fun. I mean, sometimes Kickstarter can be addicting because it's amazing to see a gem of an idea become a project, become a completed project. Obviously some make it, some don't, but this is just a great avenue for fans and folks that just love the toys to find out so much more. And, instead of having to wait for somebody to maybe put together these stories and maybe too late in doing it, people like yourself are just making this happen and making collectors happy. So, Brian, thank you very much, and I appreciate your time today.
Well, Greg, thank you, and it's my pleasure. Great to come on and talk to you. Thank you.
I'd like to check out, refuel my ship, prepare for my immediate departure.
I want to thank my guest Brian Hickey for being on the program. It was a pleasure to get a chance to talk to him and find out more about this amazing Kickstarter, which has still a little time left if you want to get in on it. I am so pumped. I bought in. It's exciting. It's some stuff I want to find out about. Collecting from another vantage point, toys from another vantage point, comics from another vantage point, and see all this vintage goodness that should be in. We're going to put the links in the description of the podcast if you want to check it out. But I do recommend at least taking a gander at it. I think it's at a good price, and I think the Kickstarter package will be amazing. All right, I'm going to let Card Squadron take it out, and we'll talk to you soon.
The Rebel Base Card podcast focuses on cards, collecting, and the Star Wars community, and appreciates you coming along for the ride.
If you have any feedback for this episode, you can reach out to the program in a number of ways. You can leave a comment on the Instagram post for this episode. You can also DM Greg on Instagram at Rebel Base Card.
Make sure to also follow the Rebel Base Card on Twitter and Facebook at Rebel Base Card. If you want, you can send an email to greg@rebelbasecard.com.
And you can find show notes for this and all episodes on the website rebelbasecard.com. In the Star Wars Card Trader app, and just about every other one, you can find Greg at Corn-Fed Tech.
The Rebel Base Card uses the hashtag Card Squadron as a way to alert friends about cool cards and recent drops in the galaxy far, far away. It's a great way to bring our community a little bit closer together and help one another finish our sets in time. We collect, communicate, and commiserate. Well, at least when we run out of credits or crystals to spend on our digital collections. Join the fun, even if all the other cool squadron names were already taken. And remember, we collect as one and would be honored if you join us.
And if you are a sketch card artist or Star Wars artist or collector, cosplayer, and want to talk about your work, your craft or passion, drop Greg a line. I'm sure he'd love to hear your story. You can also help the show by leaving a comment or review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you got this episode.
Otherwise, the mission is clear. Keep those cards out of the hands of the Empire, and the Rebel Base Card will return soon.
This podcast is not affiliated in any way with Topps, Disney, or Star Wars, nor is it endorsed by Disney or Lucasfilm, and is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. All names and sounds and any other related items are properties of their respective trademarks and or copyright holders here in the U.S. and abroad. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com.
That's it.